Welcome to another video tutorial. In this video, we're going to take a detailed look at containers. I'm going to start by, first of all, explaining how containers work and how to set them up very simply in your games. But then we'll expand upon that and we'll talk about how to customize containers, how to customize the look of them, but also how to customize how they function. Okay, and we'll use some scripting as well, some scripting examples of how to do that. Okay, we'll also talk about some things to bear in mind that you need to know about how containers function. So I'll talk about those things as and when they come up. Okay, so the first thing, however, is how do containers work? So assuming you've made your 3D objects, which is not going to be covered in this video, the actual modeling aspect, but assuming you've got your models that you want to have function as a container, I've got 4 on this map: a barrel, bookshelf, and a chest. And I'm also going to talk about how you can make NPCs act like a container as well. But that will come after we've done the first 3. Okay. So let's start with the barrel. So we want to turn this 3D object, which at the moment, that's all it is. It's just decorative. It's just a 3D object. We want to turn this into a container. So the first thing you need to do is make sure you've got at least orange or green lines leading to the object which you wish to interact with. So in this case, the barrel. And then what you want to do is select the barrel, or select, in this case, the barrel, select the object, and you want to look in the properties of the object for the item container option, and you want to turn that on. So when you turn the container option on, it will present you with these options. The container widget, that's what the contents of the container are going to look like when it opens up. So you can leave it as default, or you can customize your own interface for that, which we'll get to in a moment. For now, we'll leave it at default. You then have an on-open script and on-close script option. This will basically allow you to assign scripts to those 2 events. So if you want something to happen before you see the contents of the container, when you first interact with it, then you can place a script in the on-open event. And likewise, if you want something to happen the moment you close the container, close the inventory, then you can put a script in the on-close event. We'll take a look at both of those in this video, but for now we'll leave those as none. Container name, this is going to be the text that appears on the widget, the interface, that pops up with the items inside. So for this case, we would type wooden barrel. Okay, and I'll explain a little bit more about how this works, again, when we start to take a deeper look at customizing the inventory. But for now, just how do you set up a container? You can just turn that on, give this a title, and then the most important thing, of course, is the items in the container. So here we have a box that contains all of the things that are going to be in the container. And then underneath, you'll have an available items option. And this will be a drop-down list of all the items you have in your items editor. So you create the items that you want to go either into the container or have on your inventory and things. And then those items, when this is saved, those items will be visible in this drop-down list. So if there's no items in this list, then you need to make sure that A, you have items that you've created. And if you have, make sure it's saved so that the engine knows that they actually exist. As long as you've created some items and saved the items editor, then those items will be visible in the available items list. So you can then pick what items you want to have inside this container. So let's say, for example, we put an apple inside this container. So we'd select the item, in this case the apple, and we'd click the add button, and that now goes into the container. Now the apple, in the options for it, I've set it to be stackable with a stack limit of 10. So I could, for example, edit this number either by clicking the up and down arrows or double click, and I can type in 5, for example, and now there'd be 5 apples in that slot. Let's say I wanted to add a banana, so I'd then select the banana and I'd click add. I'd then add the banana, and if I wanted, let's say, 4 of them, again, banana is set as a stackable object. If we take a look at the ruby, for example, it's not stackable. So if I wanted to add a ruby into this barrel, there's no up and down arrow, and I can't edit the number by double clicking it to type a number in. So if I wanted more than one ruby, I'd need to add another one. However, that's going to take up an extra slot. Okay, so I'll show that in a moment. Okay, so that in essence is how simple it is to create a container. If you didn't want to customize anything, if you just wanted to turn something into a container and put some things inside it, that's all you need to do. Select the 3D object, turn the item container option on, give it a name, the text that will appear when the inventory appears, and then put the things inside from your items list, and that's it. If we were to save the map now and go into game, we'd be able to open this container and see those items. Up comes wooden barrel, and you can see the 5 apples, the 4 bananas, and these 2 rubies, because they're not stackable. See how they're taking up, to put 2 in the same container, it takes up a slot each one. Okay, so that is in essence how simple it is to make a container if you didn't want to customize anything. However, now let's start to take a look at how you can customize containers. So to do that, let's take a look at the next object, which is the bookshelf. So we can turn item container on again to turn it into an item container. And now let's take a look at the container widget option. This will allow us to change the way the container looks when we open the inventory for it. So to do that, we go to the UI editor, go to the widgets tab, and if you drop this down, you won't have these widgets if this is the first time you're opening the widget editor. You'll just have these padlocked ones. But if we drop down this list, you'll see one called item container. This is the default container. So if you leave this as default, which we did with the barrel, then this is the one that appears. Okay, the one with 10 slots and then the title of the container. Now, notice a couple of things, or one thing in particular, about this widget. If you want to edit this widget, for example, let's say you wanted to change the amount of slots, maybe you wanted to take some away or you wanted to add some, you can't edit the inbuilt one because it's got a padlock icon on it, which means it's locked. You can't do anything to it. But if you wanted to edit and use this as a starting point, you can click the duplicate widget button, give it an ID. So we'll call this def dupe because it's a duplicate of the default. I'm not actually going to use it. I'm going to delete it in a minute, but just to show you what you would do, you'd create one, you'd give it an ID, and now this is one that we can edit. So now we can actually select the slots and delete them if we wanted to, whatever you want to do. Now, what I wanted to point out is notice how the title bar text, this bit, is left empty. For any widgets that are going to be used as a container widget, you want to leave the title bar text empty. And you don't have to leave it empty, but it's going to be overridden anyway, so you may as well leave it empty. This option here, container name, so in this case I type bookshelf. This text, when you interact with this item, this object here, the bookshelf, it's going to put this text into here. So this is now going to say bookshelf when you interact with the bookshelf, okay? But if we were to assign the same widget to the barrel as well, but we've got wooden barrel opening the same widget, then this will now say wooden barrel, okay? And I will show this in action in a moment just so you can see how this works. But in essence, this text in this option gets filled in by this option on the object itself, okay? Now, if you don't put any text in here, so for example, if we didn't type anything into this box and we didn't have anything in this box, then this would be blank in game. But let's use one I made earlier called container 1. So this is just a custom container widget. It's just got 3 slots in it. and no text. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set this widget to container 1, and I'm going to fill in bookshelf. Okay, so again, notice how in the UI editor, this widget has no text. Container 1 does not have any text up here. Okay, but I've typed bookshelf into here. In fact, just to prove it's coming from here, I'll type bookshelf hello. I've never typed that anywhere other than in this box. Okay, let's put a couple of books inside. So drop this down, Thieves Guild book, add that. Scroll of Healing, let's add that. And let's put the Eldritch book in there as well, add that. We get bookshelf hello. So it's drawing that text from the container name option and it's filling it into the blank widget title when it opens this widget. Okay, and then there's our 3 books. So that's how to customize the look of a container. And obviously you can have other elements in with these widgets as well. So for example, if I change this, instead of using container 1, I'll set it to container 1C. If we take a look at container 1C, it's not just using container slots, but I've put text on the widget and I've put an image element on the widget as well, just to show that you can have all of these widget tools can go onto a container widget as well. So we get our items, the text is visible, and our image is there. So you can completely customize the look of your container interface when they pop up. So now let's take a look at the next options that we have in the default container options, which is the onOpen and onClose script. So for this, I'm going to set this to container 2, and just to show that widget, it's like container 1, but instead of being 1 row, it's just 2. So it's got 6 slots in it. So I was setting that to container 2. And then we're going to make a couple of scripts which are going to go into the onOpen and onClose events. Because what we have here is a chest. And the chest, if we open it in the voxel editor, has 2 animations, an open and a close, which we can use for when we first interact with the chest, and then when we're done looking inside the chest, we can then close it. So for that, what we're going to do is we'll go to the script editor, we'll create a new script, which we'll call open chest. And I'll do this with the visual script editor for now, just so you can see the commands. So what we're going to do is we're going to play animation as the first thing we're going to do. And we're going to leave the entity as self, because self is a reference, a dynamic reference. It means it always changes. It's not always one set thing. But what self basically means is it's a reference to whatever the script is attached to. So in this case, we're going to put this script on the chest. So self is going to be the chest. So we can use that as a shorthand without having to specify the chest literally by typing in, you know, a reference to the chest. We will have to do that later, so you'll see the difference. But for now, we can just use self because we're putting this script directly on the chest. Then we need the animation name. So in this case, open, because we want to open the chest. Okay. Now, if you wanted to, we could also have a message pop up. So we could put a display message in that says something like, you open the chest and look inside. Okay, so there's our very simple open chest script. Okay, and we can put that script on the chest on the onOpen script. So we want open chest. Okay, then what we'll do is we'll go back to the script editor, we'll quickly do a save as, and we'll call this close chest. And for this, we just want to delete the display message and change this to play the close animation of the chest. And we're going to set this as the onClose script close chest. Okay, then we can put a container name in, treasure chest. So that means treasure chest is going to fill in this text here. And let's put some treasure in the chest. So let's have ruby, and let's have diamond, and we can change the amount of diamonds. So let's have 5 diamonds in there. And let's put a scroll of healing in there as well. So the first time we interact with this chest, it's going to play the onOpen script, which is basically going to play the animation for the chest to open and then show a message. So it opens and we get the message, you open the chest and look inside. That's now the end of the onOpen script. So then what it's going to do is open the container. So as soon as I close this message, up comes the treasure chest container. It's filled in the text with the name. It's put the items in, the scroll of healing, the 5 diamonds, the ruby. And as soon as I close the container, it's going to play the onClose script, which is just simply going to play the animation on the chest to close. Okay? And every time we click, we get the onOpen script, the container, and then the onClose script. And it's in a loop every time you click. onOpen script, then the container, and then the onClose script. Now, we could also slightly improve the onOpen script, because currently, every time we click on the chest, it's always going to show this message, which you may want this to only happen once. For example, if this is a quest important chest and you want some text, like, for example, you unlock the chest, or something like that. You want some text to come up, but you only want it to come up once. Then we don't want it to always keep playing every time we open the chest. So what we can do is go back to our onOpen script, our open chest script, and I'm just going to type it out here just because it's quicker for me to do so, but I will show you afterwards, if I remember, what the nodes look like. But what we'll do is we'll type if self, and I will explain all this in a minute, if self.property opened is equal to false, then display message, you open the chest and look inside. And then we want to set self.property opened to true. Otherwise, we want to wait, let's say, 1 second. End. Apply and save. So if we take a look at the visual script, so I've got a play animation, self-open, then we've got a condition, evaluate condition node, which is checking if self.property opened is false. So if you want to see the condition, if you want to know how to build it, let me just show you that. You would click this button to open the expression builder, and then you would just type self.property equals Boolean, and then you'd make sure the Boolean is false, and the property itself is called, in this case, opened. Okay? And then you'd have a line coming out of the top dot. This is, if it is false, then you open the chest and look inside, display message, followed by assign value. So these are found here, assign value and evaluate condition. Assign value self.property opened is equal to true. Again, you would set that to Boolean, set it to true. And then if else, then wait 1 second. Okay, so that's what this script is going to do. If we save the script, the only other thing we need to do now is go back to our chest in the map editor and go to its properties, scroll up till we find a section called custom properties. Open this down. We need to drop this to Boolean, add, and we need to make this called opened and set it to false. So this is the thing that our script is evaluating. If this is false, which it will be to begin with, and then we're changing it to true after we've first opened it. So without this, that script wouldn't work properly. So create the property as well, save, and let's test that now. So now the first time we click on the chest, it opens and we get this message because the property opened on the chest is currently false, but it's now just been set to true because of this. So we'll click off, it will bring up the container. We can now close the container as normal and the lid closes, okay? But now the next time we click on this, that property opened is now true. So it shouldn't show the message. Instead, what should happen is it should play the animation of the lid opening, wait a second, just so we can see the lid opening, and then we'll just get the contents of the container. Okay, so that gets rid of the message every single time you click on it. It only happens the first time, because once you've done it the first time, it then sets a setting to log the fact that you've already done it once, so don't do it again. Okay, so that should give you an idea of how you can use the on-open and on-close scripts as well. So those are the options available to you by default when you enable item container on objects. So you can customize your widgets using the widget editor. You can customize your on-opening and on-closing script events by writing scripts and assigning them to those events. You can type in the name you want, and you can add the items that you want into the relevant container, and then it will appear in-game. Now let's talk about how to change the way containers behave, okay? Because at the moment, we've got them behaving in such a way that we just set them on an object, and as soon as you click on that object, one way or another, the container just appears, okay? Now that's fine if that's all you want to do. If I just want to make this barrel a container that always shows its contents, no matter what, then this is very easy to do. However, what if we wanted to slightly script the behavior of containers a bit more? So we might want a container, for example, that is initially locked. So where the first time you interact with it, you can't open it, because this on-open script that we've placed on this chest, just to be clear, it will still open the container when this script ends. So you can't use this to actually lock the chest. It's still going to open the chest. So if you wanted a container that starts locked and doesn't open until something happens in your game that then unlocks it, well, then you need to start scripting containers. So we're going to take a look at that in a moment. But before we get to that, let's take a look at this NPC. We've got Sarah over here. Let's talk about how you might be able to make a NPC have a container aspect to them, where you can sort of browse what they're carrying and take something from them or something like that. By default, NPCs or characters and tiles, these two ones, the tiles and the characters, can't have containers on them. Only objects can be set as containers. Only objects have this option. Where is it? To clip one. Only these objects have this option, item container. Characters do not. Okay? So we're going to have to go about this a slightly different way. So let me now show you the cool thing about really cool way to use containers. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a tile to the end of the map. I'm going to delete the navigation so that you can't actually walk onto that tile, and then what we'll do is we'll make a quick object, so a new object, which I'll just call crate, and I'm literally just going to make an object that looks like that, okay? It doesn't have to be fancy, because you're not actually ever going to see this object, okay? Now, you could make this invisible, i.e. just delete all the voxels, but while you're working on the game, it's going to be really fiddly to select it and things like that. So I'm actually going to show you a really quick way of just making this something that you're never going to see. So we'll save this, and what we're going to do is go back to our map, select our crate object, and we're going to click on the tile that we've just added off of the map. Now you could place this tile somewhere completely off in the distance, but in this case we don't need to. We've made it so that we can't walk onto it using the nav mesh, so the player wouldn't know it's there. And what we can do is we can place this crate model down onto this tile. Now the great thing about objects is they can be stacked. So I could place another one on top, and another one on top of that, and another one on top of that. And we can place, you know, a handful. So we've got a tower here, basically, a stack of different crate models, okay? And these are all objects, which means each one of these let's start from the top, let's say. Each one of these, you can go into its properties and turn it into a container. So let's turn this one into a container on the top. We can give it a widget, let's say container 2. We could give it a script for open and close. I'm not going to bother. But in this case, we can give it a name that's going to appear on the widget for this container. In this case, I'm going to type in Sarah's inventory. And then we can give Sarah, let's say, an apple and a banana and a ruby, let's say. Okay. Then what we can do is we can click the ground tile, the grass tile, and we can right click and add it to a group by going to the grouping section, add to group. This will bring up the name for your group. I'm just going to call this containers, let's say. Cancel out that. And we'll come back to that group in a minute, okay? But let's just show you how you set up Sarah to have an inventory. So we just created that container at the top, okay? But it's a crate. It's not Sarah at all. It's a crate. It's a completely separate object, okay? But we've set this up no differently to how we've set up these ones, okay? What we're going to do now is go to the dialog editor and let's refresh that. We'll create a new dialog, which we'll call Sarah dialog. And you can have any text in here you want. I'll just create an NPC node where she says, hello. And then the player can say, are you carrying anything interesting? To which she responds with, have a look. And then we'll have a script node at the very end, which is going to then show the contents. So for this quick script, we're going to click on the script window. That's going to open up the quick script builder. We'll delete the script that's in there and we'll add in an open container. So filter for open container, drag that in, and we're going to use this to open the container. Now, the only thing I forgot to do, so we'll click validate for a moment and close that. We need to go back to the map editor. And what we do need to do this time that we didn't need to do for these is we need to select our top crate that we've made into a container, and we need to give it an ID, an entity ID, so that our scripts and dialogues can reference this particular container. So I'll just call this crate 1. You could call it whatever you want, container 1, whatever, okay? And then we'll save that. Go back to our dialogue, edit this script, and we're going to type that into here. So open container, crate 1, okay? Validate and okay. And then we'll go back to, we'll save the dialogue, go back to the map editor, select Sarah. When player interacts with Sarah, start dialogue, and the dialogue, Sarah dialogue. So here's the stack of containers, okay? If we talk to Sarah, we get, hello, are you carrying anything interesting? Have a look. And then up comes Sarah's inventory. She's carrying a ruby, a banana, and an apple. But what's actually happening behind the scenes is that this isn't Sarah's inventory, like it's not actually on her. It's opening this container over here at the end of her dialogue. So we're scripting this container to open. A remote container is being displayed. And because that container has things inside it, we can grab the things that are inside it. But in this case, we're using it to simulate Sarah actually having an inventory. So if we end the dialogue, up comes her inventory, and we can see the things that are inside her inventory. But at the end of the day, this is just a container, just like the rest of these. The text is being filled in by the container name option, which we've set to be Sarah's inventory, so it fits the thematics of what we're trying to do or trying to present. And we've put some things inside that container that should be the things that Sarah would be carrying, okay? So this is how you can set up NPC containers. A couple of things to know. First of all, this container is only going to exist on this map, so this is really only useful for NPCs that stay on the map they're in. If you had an NPC that then walked into a different map that didn't have the container in that map, it wouldn't be able to open it. But you could, of course, make a duplicate of that container in the other map as well if you wanted to, persist the inventory. So that's important to note. But also currently we've got this stack of containers visible. So how can we really easily hide these containers? Well, that's where the group comes in. Because if I show you this in game before we implement it in our script, if I bring the console down and I type in hide group underscore, hide underscore group, open and close parentheses, and within the parentheses, type the name of the group that you added this tile to. Remember how we selected this tile, we added it to a group, and we've called that group containers, I think. So if we hide that group now, not only does it hide the tile, but it hides the containers that are stacked on top of it. And because we can't walk onto that tile, because we didn't create any navigation leading onto it, you wouldn't know it was there, okay? But it is still technically there. So if we interact with Sarah, we still get the inventory popping up, okay? So you can still use the containers, but it's just a really quick way of not having them be visible. Just stack them on top of a tile and then hide the tile in your game. So how would you do that? Just go to your startup script. After loading the map, hide group container. If you're doing it with the visual script editor, then just drag in a hide group node and type in container into there. That should happen after load map. Containers. Now, as soon as you start the game, they're gone. Okay, so that's how you can have them be hidden at the start. So the great thing about this method that we've just used to make a container appear in Sarah's dialogue is you can also use that method to do some really awesome things with containers beyond just making NPCs show them. For example, we could have this treasure chest not actually be a container. For example, let me show you what I mean. Let's go to the second container down on this stack, and let's turn this into a container as well. So we'll give it an ID of box 2, and we will turn it into a container. We'll make it container 2 as well. I don't see any reason to change it. We won't have an on open and close script. Oh yes, we will for the chest. We will. So we'll put open chest on there and close chest on there. We'll need to change those scripts in a minute. We'll put treasure chest on here and add in, let's say, a ruby and 5 diamonds. Okay, so there's our contents of our treasure chest. What we will need to do though is, because we're putting the treasure chest not actually on the treasure chest, we're putting it on this container here that's separate. So we're going to need to amend the scripts that we've just placed onto this container. So go to the script editor, go to your onOpen chest script, and this time, instead of using self, you are actually going to have to give this chest an ID, which we haven't done yet. So we'll scroll up and we'll call this T chest for treasure chest. We'll go back to our script. Oh, I need to save that. Go back to our script, edit. So instead of self, in fact, let's do this via the visual editor, just so you can see what's happening. So we're going to change self to entity by ID, and I'm going to type T chest. And then we need to say if entity property equals Boolean, this needs to be false. This needs to be T chest. And the property needs to be opened. So if entity T chest.property opened is false, then display message, you open the chest and look inside. Otherwise, wait 1 second. And then we want to assign value not to the self property, but to entity T chest to true. Save that. And then edit your close chest script. The same thing again. This can't be self anymore because self would now be the container that's stacked, and that's not what we want. we want to change the treasure chest animation. So we're going to point specifically to the chest, telling it to close. Okay. So with those amendments made to the script assigned now to this object, it will now interact with this object. Okay. So what we can now do is go to the treasure chest. And the most important thing, if you're going to do it this way, is you need to turn off the item container option on the actual chest object. Otherwise, you'll have two conflicting containers trying to open at the same time. So this time we've disabled this from being a container. This 3D object now is just a treasure chest. It's just a model, okay? But we can still click on it, okay? Because what we're now going to do is we're going to scroll up to the character interacts event. So this is when you click on this model, we want to run a script. And let's just quickly make a script for that, which we'll call chest interact. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to say if self, and I can use self because this is actually going to go onto the chest. If self property opened is equal to false, then open container crate two, sorry. Okay. Else open container crate 12. End. Apply and save, and set that script on the character interacts option, which is interact chest or something like that. Chest interact. There we go. So what's basically going to happen now is when you click on this chest, instead of the chest opening the container, it's going to check this property that's on this object. If it's false, which it will be to begin with, then it's going to open this container here. Now this container is set to play the animation open on this chest and show a message and then reveal its contents, and then on close the lid of the chest. Okay. The next time you interact with this chest, the property will be true. So it won't open this container anymore. It's now going to try and open this container, which is then going to show a completely different set of contents. Okay. So we've now set up a 3D object that, depending on the state of the game, can have two completely different inventories without having to sort of take things out and put things in. We can have two completely set up separate containers and just switch between them depending on the state of the game. So let's just check that all works. So if we click on the chest the first time, it opens, you open the chest and look inside, then we get the treasure chest inventory, and as soon as I close it, the lid closes, okay? But what that script also does, as well as showing the message, is it sets the property on this chest to true. Now it's true, it should open a completely different container. Now this time the lid won't open, but it will show Sarah's inventory. Why? Because Sarah's inventory is what's in crate 1, which we've now set to be what we open. And that script doesn't have that container doesn't have an on open or an on close script. So it's not playing the animation to open or close this chest. So if we did actually want two separate containers that still open and close the lid of the chest, then you need to make sure the other container has the same on open and on close scripts. But this is just to show you that you can set up a scenario where the first time you interact with a chest, it opens one inventory, and then the second time you open it, it's a completely different set of items and an inventory. So if you wanted to have an object that changes its contents after you've completed a quest or after a certain point in your game, or you just want a magical chest where it's random which contents are inside it every time you click on it, then this is how you would go about doing that. You would make the object not a container, but you'd have it scripted to grab a random container or a different container or whatever it is you're trying to do, and that would then be the contents of the object that you've clicked on. So for example, if we wanted this bookshelf to have a random set of books every time you click on the shelf, then you could set up a stack of different containers with different books inside, and then randomize which one of these it decides to open based on, a random roll. Okay. So another thing that you might find useful when it comes to this idea of having external containers being referenced by the objects on the map is what we can do is I'm going to set 3 of these to individual containers. So this one will be container 2, and this will be the barrel, and this can have just a apple and a banana in it, and we'll save that. This one can be the treasure chest, and it can have a ruby and a couple of diamonds in it, and that's going to be I'm going to set this one, to container 1. This is then going to be container 2, and this is going to be the treasure chest. And then I'm going to set this one up as well as an item container. I'm going to leave it as default, and I'm going to call this book shelf, and we'll just add all 3 books into here. So the Eldritch book, Scroll of Healing, and the Thieves Guild. So we've got 3 completely unique, and this would obviously need an ID, so I'll call this create 3. So we've got 3 unique containers set up that are completely independent of the objects that are going to interact with them. Okay. Now, one thing that we can do is we can click on each of these objects and create a custom property on each object. And I'm going to create the same property on each of the 3 objects, but make the value different. So I'm going to create a string property on the barrel, and I'm going to call this property container. And the value is going to be create 1. Okay, let me just check. That is the right one. Yes, wooden barrel. Okay, and then create 2 is the treasure chest. So I'm going to click the treasure chest, and we already have an opened property on this. I'm going to add a text property, give it the same name, container, but the value is going to be create 2. And in the bookshelf, I'm going to add a text property, same name, container, the value, create 3. So I've given each of these 3D objects the same property, but each property on the object is set to a different name that matches the ID of one of these crates. Okay, so technically, so it's like we're assigning one of these containers to this relevant object. Okay, how we then use that is all we simply have to do is create a single script. This is the benefit of doing it. We only have to create a single script called open container. So it's much more efficient than having to create multiple scripts for every single container you've got to open a different container. We just make one script called open container, and we can simply say open container, and then the container name, all we do is we pass in self.property container, and that will grab the relevant container name on that property and fill it in as the ID for the open container. So if we apply and save that script, we can now click on the barrel and scroll up to the script section, and character interacts, open container. The shelf, character interacts, open container. And the chest, character interacts, open container. And now that one single script is going to make the relevant 3D model, i.e. the shelf or the chest or the barrel, open the correct container that we've assigned externally to that object. So let's just save and make sure they all work one after the other. So if we click on the barrel, we get the wooden barrel with a banana and an apple in it. We click on the bookshelf, we get the bookshelf, the 3 books in it, and it's using the default widget. Click on the chest should open, and we get the script, and then we get the treasure chest, and it closes. So we've been able to set up via those properties that they will automatically just grab the right container without having to have a single script for every single container telling it to open a different container. We can just say use the property value that you've got assigned on any of your container models, and then you can tell it to use that property to call the correct container that would match that particular model. Okay? So that should give you an idea of how flexible it is to just disconnect the actual visual objects from a behind-the-scenes stack of containers, which is why it's a really cool thing to do. And it takes up no real estate because you can stack them all vertically. Obviously, there is a stack limit, so you're not going to be able to stack indefinitely. But what you can then do is if you've reached the limit, you can just add another tile, make sure you can't walk onto it, stack those up again, and then just add both of these tiles to the same group. And then when you start the game, that group will hide them all, so you wouldn't know they were there. Okay. So let's talk about how you can enable and disable containers, and something to bear in mind with enabling and disabling a container. So, important thing to know, if I select this barrel, which is currently a container, I'm going to give it an ID so I can reference it in a script. So I'm going to call this barrel 1. Okay. If I select this barrel and scroll down to the item container options, you can see I've set up some things on this barrel. I've set up a container name, wooden barrel, and I've filled it with an apple, a banana, and a couple of rubies, right? If I was to turn the item container option off, and then I was to turn it on again, it's wiped the container name and it's emptied the contents. So if you wanted a container to start off, so we say, don't be a container at the start of the game, and then later in your game you use the enable container command, which we're going to get to in a minute, it will turn this into a container, but there'll be nothing in it. So you would then have to then add items to container in the same script. But the other problem is you're never going to be able to set what the widget is if you wanted to then customize what the widget is, and you're not going to be able to set the name. So let me show you how to actually enable and disable a container in your scripts, if that's what you want to do. So what you need to do is you need to set up your container first. So this needs to be on, and you need to set up your container. So let's say container, it's going to be the default widget. Container name is going to be wooden barrel. And we're going to add in an apple, a banana, and a couple of rubies, like we had before, okay? But we're going to leave that set up, okay? But we want it to start disabled, okay? So you enable it later on. So all you have to do is go to your script editor and go to your startup script. Now, remember how I gave it an ID as well. This is important. I gave it the ID of barrel_1. You obviously need to make sure you give it an entity ID because we're going to need to reference it in a script via this name. So make sure you give it a name that you can remember and grab. Go to the startup script, and as well as hiding this group, we're going to add a disable container command into our script, and we're going to point it at barrel 1. So that's now going to disable the inventory. But because it's enabled in the map editor and it's filled up in the map editor, it will remember those contents. So don't disable it in the map editor. Disable it at the start of your game, but keep it enabled in the map editor. Okay? So now let's set up a scenario. We'll edit the Sarah dialog script. Or let's just quickly make another one. So let's go to the dialog editor, make a new dialog called Sarah 2, and we'll just have a quick player node that says, can I look inside the barrel, please? And an NPC response, sure. And then we'll have a script, and that script is going to do the opposite of what we did in the startup, which is we're going to enable container. So drag that into there, and again, this time you want to type barrel. Well, so we want to now enable the container that we disabled at the start of the game. Okay, so does that make sense? So at the end of this dialog, we're going to enable the container, and in our startup script, once we've loaded the map, we're then disabling that container, but it is enabled to begin with in the map editor, so that you can set the text for it, set the widget for it, any scripts that it should have on open and close, and the items inside it. So it saves those things. Otherwise, if you turn it off in the map editor, it's going to unassign all those things, and then you're not going to be able to assign them in game. So set the item container up, leave it on, but disable it in your startup script. And then your dialog, or whenever in your game you want to enable it, just enable it again. So let's assign this very quickly to Sarah. We'll change the dialog that Sarah uses to Sarah 2, and let's test this works. So we can't click on the barrel. There's no interact icon because it's not a container. It's disabled. So it's just a 3D object. Let's talk to Sarah. Can I look inside the barrel, please? Sure. Now it's a container because we can click on it. So we click on it. Up comes wooden barrel with the items inside. So it's remembered the things we set, because in the map editor, we saved it with those things set. We just disabled it at the start of our game in the startup script. So that's how you use enable and disable container if you want to use them in your game. So don't start with a container off, leave it set up, and disable it at the very start of your game, and then you can enable it whenever you want to use it. Okay? So, the last thing I want to talk about before we close out is the importance of how these widgets work in relation to containers. Now, this might be a bit advanced for those of you that are just looking to learn how to set up a container. You should now have enough information to get going making your containers. This is for those that want to, do really complicated things like query what's inside containers, checking if something's in a specific item is inside, or grabbing all the things that are inside, those sort of things. There's some really important things to know about how these widgets work in relation to containers. So I'm just going to take a moment to quickly talk about that now. So if you're interested in that, then keep watching. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to demonstrate this, I'm going to set the same widget on 2 containers. So I'm actually going to set this barrel to use container 2, and I'm going to set this chest back to being a container. So I'll take off the interact script. So this is going to use container 2. It's not going to play the script. So it's not about the scripts the container does, but we're going to use, we'll call this treasure chest, and it doesn't really matter what we put in it. I'm just going to put a few apples in it. Okay. So let's just load the game quickly so you can see how this works. So if I bring down the console and I type show widget container 2. So just to remind you, this is the widget that is used by both the barrel and the chest for their containers. Okay. Now, if I show that, you can see that it's empty. The reason it's empty is because we have not yet interacted with a container that's set to use that widget. So it's important to know that the items found in containers that use this widget, this widget does not actually store the items. Okay, the container stores the items, and then it populates the widget when you interact with that container. So, for example, let's close this widget. Hang on, do it this way. And now let's interact with the barrel. We need to enable it. Hold on. I forgot that my startup disables it. Now let's click on this barrel. Now we get wooden barrel with 2 rubies and a banana and an apple inside, right? Now, this wooden barrel has populated this widget. It's given it text and it's given it some items. If we now close that container and we re-show the widget that we showed earlier that was blank and empty, now it's still got the wooden barrel text. It's got the 2 rubies in it. It's got the banana in it. And it's got the apple in it. Okay? If we now go and interact with the treasure chest, now we get the treasure chest full of 4 apples. Okay? The text has changed and the items in the slots have changed. Okay? Again, we'll close the container and we'll reopen the widget. Now it shows the treasure chest with the 4 apples in. It doesn't show the barrel anymore. So this widget is completely disconnected from the containers and is filled when you interact with the container. And more importantly, it remembers the last container you interacted with that uses that widget. So for example, this bookshelf doesn't use container 2. It uses container 1C. So we get this widget comes up, okay? If I now close that container and I re-show container 2, it doesn't show the bookshelf contents because we didn't use that bookshelf for this widget. So this widget's still tied to the treasure chest, okay? Now this is important to know for 2 reasons. First of all, it's important to know that until you interact with a container, the widget set for that container, in this case container 2, will be blank. So if you're trying to query if, for example, this chest has an item inside it, and you're querying if widget container 2, element slot 1, has an item in it, at the start of the game, it won't have an item in it because it's not actually tied to that container. The widget at the start of the game, as you saw, was completely empty and didn't even have any text up here because we hadn't yet interacted with a container set to use that widget that can then fill it. Okay, so if you want to query if a container that uses this widget has an item in it, you need to interact with that container first to populate this widget with that container's items, so you can then query if that widget now contains a specific item or grab all the things that are in that container. Okay, for example, let me just reset the game so I can really show you why this is important. I'm just going to make a quick impromptu script in the console. If widget container 1, or I'm sorry, container 2 dot element, so this is going to be one of the slots, in this case slot 1, dot item not equal to null, then print widget container 2 dot element 0001 dot item dot name, else print no item in slot. End. So there's our impromptu script. I'm just going to copy that just in case I need to paste it again. Shouldn't need to, but just in case. Copy that. So if we run that, we're going to get no item in slot, okay? Because if we show the widget in question, quite rightly, it's blank. So that's why it's coming back with no item in slot, because if widget container element item is null, then print no item in slot. Well, it's null, there's nothing in it, so it prints no item in slot. So if you had a script where you were checking, we know that, for example, the barrel uses this widget for its container, and we want to check if the barrel has, you know, an apple, for example, and we want to check the first slot of it. So we're saying if widget container 2 element 01 item is the apple, it's going to fail currently because we haven't yet interacted with the barrel in this session of the game for it to put any of the contents of the barrel in this widget. However, if I now close the console, interact with the barrel, I've got to enable it again, hold on, startup scripts. Barrel 1, I now interact with the barrel, okay, we get the content of the barrel. If I now rerun that same impromptu script that I wrote a moment ago, now it comes back with Ruby. It's come back with there is an item in the slot and it's the Ruby. And if we show the contents again, that's correct. The Ruby is in that slot. But the other thing that you've got to remember is that if you interact with a different chest that uses the same widget, so we'll close this and we'll now interact with the treasure chest. Okay, if we run, close that, if we run the exact same script, this script here, now it comes back as Apple, doesn't come back as Ruby anymore. Why? Because now the container remembers the fact that we opened the treasure chest. So these contents of this widget are going to change based on have you interacted with a container that uses it yet, in which case it's going to be empty if you haven't. And also if you have you opened another container that's set to the same widget, in which case it's now going to be those items. So if you want to have a script that is reliably querying the items that are going to be found inside it, so in other words, you should always know that widget container 2 is the treasure chest's items, then first of all, nothing else should be set to the same widget. So only the treasure chest object should be set to use that container widget. So then when it's populated, it's always those items, never anything else. But also, you need to make sure that you have interacted with the container before that script is run, because that widget will be empty first. So those are some things you really need to understand about how widgets, how the container widgets work in relation to containers. They do not start populated until you interact with a container that's set to it. And also, if you use other containers that are set to it, it will override the widget, okay? And remember the last thing you interacted with. So that will bring us to the end of this video on containers. I hope it was useful and helpful. If you have any questions, feel free to ask as always. But for now, that'll wrap up this video. Thanks for watching.